At the very top of the world, where the sun vanishes for months and the ice groans under shifting winds, a new race is unfolding. The Arctic, once frozen and forgotten, is now the front line of global competition. The US, Russia and China are all vying for control, and now India is quietly stepping in, not to join a bloc, but to carve its own path to strategic autonomy. As the ice retreats and ambitions rise, who will command the Arctic's future before it melts away? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. The Arctic, a landscape of endless white, home to polar bears, narwhals, and ancient indigenous cultures like the Inuit, the Sami, and the Yukagir. For millennia, its vastness shielded it from human ambition. But today, as the world warms, the ice that once isolated the Arctic is vanishing, revealing riches, roots, and rivalries that could reshape global power. Since the 1990s, the Arctic has lost 7.6 trillion metric tons of ice, its melting accelerating by nearly 60%. What once seemed a remote ecological crisis is now a geopolitical gold rush. Melting sea ice is exposing new shipping routes, faster, cheaper, and closer to global trade arteries than the Suez or Panama canals. And beneath that ice, an estimated 20% of the world's untapped fossil fuel reserves, more than 400 discovered oil and gas fields, and vast deposits of rare earth minerals like neodymium and dysprosium, essential for batteries, electronics, and defense systems that power the 21st century. But opportunity breeds competition. 8 nations have Arctic territory, the so-called Arctic 8: the United States of America, Canada, Russia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Together they form the Arctic Council, created in 1996 to promote cooperation and conservation. Yet, as one analyst put it, the Arctic Council was born in peace, but it now lives in a new Cold War. No country has more at stake than Russia. With over half the Arctic coastline under its control and a sprawling network of ports, airfields, and military bases stretching from Murmansk to the Bering Strait, Moscow sees the Arctic not as a frontier, but as its fortress. It's also Russia's insurance policy. As Western sanctions bite after conflict with Ukraine, the Arctic and its partnership with China offer Moscow a northern lifeline. Russia's ambition is anchored in the Northern Sea Route, or NSR, a maritime highway running across its Arctic coast. Shorter than the Suez route by nearly 2 weeks, it could revolutionize trade between Asia and Europe. But here's the catch. Moscow claims parts of it as internal waters, restricting foreign access, a move rejected by the US and NATO, and as the ice retreats, a new transpolar passage, cutting straight through international waters at the Arctic's heart, could soon open up, igniting another sovereignty battle. And one country is quite concerned about Moscow's maneuvers: Canada. In his annual speech on national threats, Dan Rogers, the director of Canada's domestic spy agency CSIS, warned that Russia and China now have a significant intelligence interest in Canada's Arctic. Both governments and private companies in Canada are reportedly being targeted as hostile powers grow more emboldened in the high north.
Canada is a proud Arctic nation, and the global Arctic has become a theater of increased interest due to its economic and strategic potential. Non-Arctic states, including the People's Republic of China, seek to gain a strategic and economic foothold in the region. Russia, an Arctic state with a significant military presence in the region, remains unpredictable and aggressive. Both of these countries, and others, have a significant intelligence interest in our Arctic, and those who influence or develop its economic or strategic potential. It's no surprise then that CSIS has observed both cyber and non-cyber intelligence collection efforts targeting both governments and the private sector in the region. So what are we doing? Well, we collect intelligence to identify any state activity that's counter to Canada's national interest. We engage significantly with Indigenous, Arctic, and Northern partners across Canada to develop awareness of what we observed and to learn from their insights. In essence, we're positioning ourselves to partner and defend Canada's interests whenever it becomes necessary.
For Ottawa, the threat is not abstract, as melting ice opens new navigable routes through Canadian waters and reveals massive reserves of critical minerals. Canada is racing to secure its northern frontier. The government is investing in new heavy icebreakers and is even weighing the purchase of a dozen patrol submarines to strengthen its Arctic defense and surveillance capabilities. So as Russia digs in, the West looks north. The United States, long absent from Arctic geopolitics, is back, determined not to let Moscow and Beijing shape the polar order. In 2019, Donald Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland, not as a joke, but a strategic necessity. Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, already hosts a major US military base at Thule, crucial for missile early warning and satellite tracking. Washington's interest in expanding its footprint there signaled a return to Cold War-style competition and the militarization of a region once reserved for science and peace.
I think everybody wants to see that work out. We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't. If you look at Greenland right now, if you look at the waterways, you have Chinese and Russian ships all over the place. And we're not going to be able to do that. We're not relying on Denmark or anybody else to take care of that situation. And we're not talking about peace for the United States. We're talking about world peace. We're talking about international security. And right now, you look at it, you have warships all over the place going through right along Greenland. We're not going to let that happen. We cannot let that happen. Or if it's going to happen, we have to be protective of our country.
China, meanwhile, calls itself a near-Arctic state. Though geographically far away, Beijing sees the Arctic as central to its polar Silk Road, an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative into the planet's icy north. Through investments in Greenland, Norway and Iceland and a growing partnership with Russia, China is quietly building what experts describe as a dual-use presence, part research, part strategic. Its icebreaker fleet is expanding, its scientists are mapping seabeds, and its companies are eyeing Arctic minerals with the same appetite they've shown in Africa and South America. The US and its allies see all this as a challenge, both to the freedom of navigation and to the rules-based order. Even as NATO expands its Arctic posture, the alliance faces a dilemma. It must confront Russian militarization and Chinese influence without turning the Arctic into another Ukraine. And somewhere between the great powers, quietly but deliberately sits India. Far from the North Pole, but closer than it appears in the new geography of power. India's tryst with the Arctic began with science, not strategy. It set up its first Arctic research station, Himadri, in Svalbard, Norway, in 2008, focusing on climate, glaciology, and atmospheric studies. But what started as a scientific endeavor is now morphing into a strategic pursuit. In 2022, India unveiled its Arctic policy, built around 6 pillars, from research and climate action to international cooperation and energy security. But at its core lies something bigger: strategic autonomy. For New Delhi, the Arctic is more than melting ice. It's a test of whether India can pursue great power diplomacy without being trapped between the West and Russia. For decades, Russia has been India's gateway to the Arctic. The two countries share decades of cooperation in oil, gas, and nuclear energy, and the Arctic offered a new frontier for that partnership. In 2019, Indian companies invested in Russia's Vostok oil project, one of the largest Arctic energy ventures alongside Rosneft. Moscow, in turn, has invited India to help develop infrastructure along the Northern Sea route, positioning it as an energy and logistics corridor in Vladivostok. But that partnership is increasingly complicated. Russia's conflict with Ukraine and its isolation from Western markets have transformed the Arctic into a geopolitical fault line. India, still dependent on Russian arms and somewhat on cheap crude, must tread carefully, engaging Moscow without antagonizing its new partners in the West and the Indo-Pacific. India's interests in the Arctic also align with its Blue Economy and Maritime Vision 2030. Melting ice means new fishing zones and potential shipping links that could one day complement the International North-South Transport Corridor or INSTC, connecting India to Europe via Iran and Russia, and perhaps even merge with Arctic routes. It's also an arena where India's space and satellite capabilities can contribute to polar monitoring, disaster management, and climate science, strengthening its global technological profile. But beyond logistics and science, there's something deeper, a shift in India's global mindset. Could the Arctic become the stage where India redefines its autonomy? No longer as a junior partner to any camp, but as an independent pole in a multipolar world. India's challenge is twofold. First, the West's return to the Arctic complicates its traditional alignment with Russia. If India overinvests in Russian projects, it risks being seen as propping up Moscow's Arctic ambitions at a time when Europe and the US are actively countering them. Second, as the Arctic becomes part of the broader Indo-Pacific security continuum, India must navigate overlapping alliances from Quad to BRICS without losing credibility in either. Yet, India's quiet diplomacy may pay off. Its observer status in the Arctic Council since 2013 gives it access to critical forums on environment, research, and governance. It is also deepening ties with Norway, Finland, and Denmark, exploring collaborations on green shipping, offshore wind, and polar research, areas where Nordic expertise and Indian scale can intersect. India's potential contribution lies in science diplomacy, using research as an entry point for influence. Its Arctic policy explicitly links the polar region with the Himalayan ecosystem, framing both as climate frontiers that directly affect India's monsoons, water cycles, food security. In doing so, India positions itself as both a victim of Arctic change and a responsible stakeholder in its future. But there's no escaping the hard politics beneath the snow. China's growing role in the Arctic, including its investment in Russian energy fields and infrastructure, directly challenges India's strategic comfort zone. Beijing's dual-use science stations and the prospect of Chinese submarines navigating the Northern Sea route have made even Arctic waters a potential theater of Asian rivalry. If India doesn't claim a seat at the polar table now, it risks being locked out of decisions that could shape its economic and environmental future. So why does the Arctic matter? Not just to superpowers, but to every nation on Earth. Because what happens at the top of the world doesn't stay there. Melting Arctic ice raises sea levels that threaten the world's coastlines from Mumbai to Miami. It disrupts weather systems, amplifying droughts, floods, and storms. It transforms global fisheries and opens new migration pathways. And it shifts the energy and trade map in ways that could redefine global economics and power for the next century. As nations jostle for control of this last frontier, the Arctic becomes a mirror of the world itself, a place where science meets strategy and climate crisis collides with geopolitical competition. In the new Cold War above the world, the Arctic is no longer a blank space on the map. It's the center of a new power struggle, and India, balancing between Moscow, Washington, and Beijing, might just find in those distant polar winds the direction of its own destiny. From the Himalayas to the high north, from monsoon cycles to melting glaciers, India's future is tied to the Arctic's fate, because as the ice melts, new paths open, not just across oceans, but across the global order itself. The Arctic, once the edge of the Earth, is fast becoming its new center, and the race for control has only just begun. Thank you for watching Statecraft.